Today we're going to start Chapter 7, talking about market structures and how they affect the way we interact with people. So by now you should have a good understanding of what a market is. They are neutral, they're efficient, and about the only way that we can allocate goods and services in an advanced economy like ours. A market is efficient not just because it is a market. It often takes another party like courts and government to make sure that the markets stay competitive. Unfortunately, many businesses still practice or expend a considerable amount of time and money to establish a non-competitive edge. So think about different businesses and what are they trying to do to try to make sure that they are the ones who are winning, even if they're not playing by the same rules that everybody else does. We'll talk about that throughout this whole lesson. So looking at this, we look at the essential questions, and the first essential question is, how do varying market structures impact the prices in a market economy? So meaning when we structure things, how we look at them, how does that change the way they interact, or what is successful and what is not? Second is, why do markets fail? Meaning that why do we see some places be strong and then eventually kind of go away? And finally, how do governments attempt to correct market failures? Meaning, how do they intervene to make sure that things are staying creative or staying effective? Most recently, I think about the automotive industry when the government came in and bailed out the automotive industry, bailed out the banks, 2008, 2010, in that area. So what we're going to look at today is the idea of monopolies and oligopolies. Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, or the Sherman Act, in 1890 to prevent firms from working together as single entities called trusts, which dominated market sectors by controlling interstate trade. Today, monopolies, which are ones that are dominated by one firm in the market, and oligopolies are a few firms dominating in the market, may be the targets of that Sherman Act. So when we look at these different things, what I'm going to look at is, what are the different types of monopolies? So today we have government monopolies, and these are things that occur when national, regional, or local governments have a law that reserved a specific business for one of its own agencies. So in real life, what we look at is the United States Postal Service. It's considered to be a government monopoly. The federal government is the sole provider of the Postal Service in the United States. There are privately owned mail carriers, but the government operates the mail services and the sale of postal products through the country's postal services. The Postal Service is a quasi-government agency and has its own employees, which are independent oversight agency, sovereign immunity, and eminent domain powers, meaning that other companies can still come in and create similar businesses, but the Postal Service is protected as a government monopoly inside of the social system. Okay. Besides the government monopolies, we have natural monopolies. And these occur when the nature of an industry doesn't allow for multiple producers or firms because of the cost of competing in that market. So what does this mean? City water supply is a prime example of natural monopolies. Look at one of the maps of New York's extensive water supply, and it reveals that there's impracticability of building another system of pipes to circulate the city's water. New York water supply system begins with upstate New York and extends southward to Staten Island. The current system started with the construction of New York City's first public well in 1677. Over centuries, the system has grown to serve ever-increasing customers, including the dense infrastructure of reservoirs, aqueducts, tunnels, and pipes. Logistically speaking, it's going to be virtually impossible for a new firm to build their own system of pipes. For starters, the cost of acquiring the necessary property in New York saturated, very expensive real estate market would be astronomical. And so the natural monopoly is created, saying that the fact that we can't, because we can't afford to compete with large firms that are already in existence, and that point, so we can't really actually break into that monopoly. The oligopoly exists when two or more firms control the market. And so that means together firms dominate the market by taking advantage of the fact that there's limited competition. It leaves consumers with few choices. Some industries seen as strong and persistent examples of oligopolies in the year. The Organization for Petroleum Exporting Companies, or OPEC, is certified as a cartel of top oil-producing countries. and it's dominated the petroleum industry since being established in 1960. OPEC is often considered the contemporary oligarchy because the groups of oil exporting nations work together to set prices and keep markets stable to maximize their own price profits. So it's collusion within a price-fixing measure. They're saying, this is what we're willing to produce and this is what we're willing to do. So this is a naturally occurring thing because of the fact that it exists when two or more firms are controlling that market. Next, you have a geographic monopoly, and this occurs when a single company or in a particular area offers a certain good or service. So when Mexico privatized its airports in the late 1990s, private firms began operating in airports in four distinct regions of the country, and therefore can be considered geographic monopolies. The different planes had different airports servicing and traveling western central Mexico and different areas. So these different things, when you look at it from this perspective, is you have one area, you have one geographical location that is going to be sit there. So it becomes a natural monopoly where other companies aren't going to actually necessarily get into it unless there was a reason for it. But of course, whenever the government has that control to begin with, it's really hard because of a large firm. You have a land on lockdown, so therefore you can't really get into that market. So it's not a competitive market in that sense. Finally, you have a technological monopoly, and this occurs when one company controls the means to manufacture a certain product or holds the sole patent on a particular technology. So during the pivotal period between 1995 and 2000, Internet Explorer was by far the dominant web browser of the Internet, which is kind of scary because it's really bad right now. The number of Internet users around the world grew from 16 million to 361 million. And in 1999, a federal judge ruled that Microsoft, the maker of Windows operating system for PCs, was operating a monopoly because he permanently bundled Internet Explorer with its Windows software, making it virtually impossible for competing web browsers because Windows dominated the market. The initial ruling compelled Microsoft to break up into two different companies. So under that final settlement, Microsoft was permitted to remain intact, but was subject to much more severe regulations. So because of it being a master of technology, the patent of that technology, it monopolized the web browser industry by using the dominance of its operating system to shut down competing web browser providers. And because it's such a large firm, the giant tech monster it is, that was really hard for another company to break in or to be able to create the same type of expectation of product that this technological monopoly of Microsoft had created.